So this lecture is about the motivation of hunger. We've all dealt with this before as a very strong motivator, but we'll get into a little bit of theory, a little bit of physiology, and maybe talk about issues related to obesity and other food-related disorders. So the first thing is, of course, the calories. Energy released from food. You know, they really are called kilocalories, but I think we all know them as calories. And calories have a specific definition. It's the amount of energy required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. That's how they define it. I remember taking a biology course where we did this. We found out how many calories were in something like a peanut by burning it and having that fire raise the temperature of water. You can calculate those things. But we can do work with that energy. You know, it depends on the size of the person, really, but these are averages. So men need about 2,900 calories per day. Women need about 2,000 calories per day. Again, it kind of depends on the size of the person. So how do we use calories? Well, we have a metabolism. That's for the work that's done in our body. We have a resting metabolism where we're not really doing anything, and yet still we're burning calories. Your brain takes a lot of calories, your muscles, breathing, that kind of a thing. Then there's what's called the thermic effect. This is the energy required to digest food and absorb food. It takes energy that we get to digest the food that we eat. And we get that energy in the form of ATP when we break down sugars. We can also get energies from fat and even protein sometimes. And then, of course, physical activity. And there's plenty of websites you can go to and find out how many calories you burn from walking, from running, from swimming. Weight gain and weight loss is best understood as calories in and calories burned or calories used. Now, there are other factors that go into it. People have different metabolisms. People work with certain types of food differently. But that gets really complicated. And it mostly comes down to how much food you're taking in, how many calories you're taking in, and how many calories you're burning in a day. But if you look at the kind of calories, we get a lot of calories from sugar, especially in the United States. I found this map. I thought this was kind of interesting. It goes back a little ways, but these are calories per day per person. And if you look around the world, boy, I tell you, Alaska and the United States, we take in a lot of calories. So these are some of the ways that we get our food, get our energy. You've probably heard of these before. There's the carbohydrates. There's complex carbohydrates and there's simple carbohydrates. The simple sugars are like, for example, glucose and table sugar sucrose and fructose, which are found in sodas and things like this. And then there's the more complex sugars. These are things like glycogen. Now what we'll do is we will take these sugars in and we'll store them in the form of glycogen, and when we need them we'll break them up and use them for energy, constantly trying to keep that homeostatic level of free sugar in the blood. Then there's the lipids. These store energy. So if you take in a lot of carbohydrates and you don't need those carbohydrates, you're gonna turn them into complex sugars, and eventually those are going to be turned into fat, because fat can store energy a lot better than the simple sugars. And then there's proteins. Proteins are things like enzymes and fibers and building blocks and things like this. Now, if you get in trouble, if you haven't eaten for a long time, or let's say you're going on this big exercise binge, you might start breaking down proteins for energy if you absolutely need to. And that's really a sign that you're not doing something right, that you're not taking in enough sugars. Some people like to do those ultra marathons that go on for 50 miles or 100 miles of running. By the end, they begin to break down their proteins and they can actually kind of get in trouble. So let's go over some of the ways that we keep homeostasis, that we keep that balance of sugar. And these are called set point models. And one of the most common and well supported is known as a glucostatic hypothesis. This is, like a thermostat that sits on the wall. That's where the stat comes in. It's a balancing of sugars. Eating is a result of a decline in blood glucose. There's motivations to eat when you detect there's low glucose. Low blood sugar, that creates a physiological need in the terms of, Clark Hall, that physiological need, which produces a drive. Now, areas of the brain, there are few areas of the brain that have glucodetectors, cells that detect glucose. One of the most common areas, one of the most prevalent areas is the lateral hypothalamus. It has glucoreceptors on the cells. In other words, when the blood goes past, it detects how much glucose is in the blood and will send signals depending on those glucose molecules. The glucose almost acts like a neurotransmitter. Destroying the cells of a rat, for example, and they don't have the motivation to eat. They might have a motivation to eat some sugars, but they really will get quite skinny. So here's kind of a picture of the hypothalamus. If you destroy the lateral hypothalamus, you get what's called lateral hypothalamic syndrome, and the rat gets very skinny, stops eating, stops having the motivation to eat. However, another area right nearby, an area called the ventral medial hypothalamus, those tell the animal when it's full. Destroy those parts of the hypothalamus and you get a very fat rat. We'll look at that a little bit later. So here's some experiments that help to show that we monitor glucose and we're motivated to eat when glucose gets low. Campfield, for example, a very simple experiment. You had 3 groups of rats. One was injected with glucose. When glucose levels dropped, they got an injection of glucose. Another was injected with salt water. And the third group didn't have an injection at all. That's a nice control group. And you ask, which of these groups lack the motivation to eat? What they found was injecting glucose and the animal postponed its meal, didn't eat as much. And injecting as a control group saline, and they were eating. It's just, this doesn't have to do with the animal chewing or swallowing, it's just glucose levels. Here's another experiment. This is called the 2-deoxyglucose experiment, the 2-deoxyglucose experiment. Now, 2-deoxyglucose binds with glucose in a way that it can't be detected by the lateral hypothalamus. So you might take in sugars, but if you also take in 2-deoxyglucose, the hypothalamus can't detect that there's glucose there. So this was done with humans, and 2 groups of humans. One was injected with 2-deoxyglucose, the other one was injected, this is a control, of saline. And then they were asked to subjectively assess how hungry they were. Simple, subjective. And people that were injected with 2-deoxyglucose, well, they had a higher hunger rate, even though both groups were given the same amount of food. But the lateral hypothalamus in this group, in the 2-deoxyglucose group, couldn't detect the glucose very well, and so these people were subjectively hungry. This points to the idea that the lack of glucose, glucoprivation, like starvation of glucose, increases the motivation to eat. It's not the only thing that motivates us to eat, unfortunately, but it is certainly a factor. This other theory is it's a little bit more controversial because it's hard to find the actual detecting mechanism. But there's an idea that something is monitoring fat levels, this long-term storage. How much we eat may be a product of our internal set point of lipids, of fats. The body monitors free fatty acids in some way, and when those fat levels get low, we're motivated to eat. This is more long-term, right? So if glucose levels are monitored kind of on a minute-by-minute basis, an hour-by-hour basis, the lipostatic theory is more long-term. What are the fat levels going on? And this will become very important in the coming slides. So when somebody loses weight because they're dieting, the carbohydrates are converted to fats to help reestablish a set point. This is when people are dieting. This set point can change, but slowly. And this idea of a lipostatic set point is a very important part of understanding weight loss. So here's an example. This is the set point model by Kesey and Pauli. The body guards against weight loss by decreasing resting metabolism rate. It tends to maintain homeostasis. So if you lose weight suddenly, a lot of weight, you lose some fat weight quickly, the body begins to go into this mode of reducing the energy burn, reducing the resting metabolism. So what happened was, in an experiment by Elliott, they measured resting metabolism rate, metabolic rate, of obese women during and after dieting. These women were asked to lose weight, and they were put on a very strict caloric diet. When women lost weight, their resting metabolic rate also decreased, reducing calorie burning and influencing weight gain. In other words, the body was trying to get back up to that lipostatic set point. This goes to an idea called the Famine Hypothesis. It dates back to when we were primates, when we were Australopithecines, when we were in a state where we didn't have abundant food like we do today. So obesity can be understood by this sort of adaptive mechanism. Let's say somebody loses weight quickly. The idea is the Australopithecus part of your brain, the old part of your brain, just says, oh, okay, I know what's going on. You are not able to get food. You are in a famine. Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. We need to do something to get you back. So the adipose tissue, the fat tissue, has evolved to protect against food shortage. So you produce fat, so when you go days without food, you can survive. Because that's really our history. We didn't have food every single day. We had a lot of food and then maybe no food because we were hunters and gatherers. So in today's society, with this old brain going on, we might lose weight quickly, and then when you've lost a lot of weight, there's all these efforts in the body to get you back. Oh, you're starving, get you back, brings you back to set point, but then overshoots it, says, oh, you tend to starve a little bit, so next time we're going to guard against that, and you might have been 150 pounds, but we're going to bring you up to 155 pounds or whatever to guard against that. And we get what's called the yo-yo effect of dieting. Lose a lot of weight, gain the weight back, overshoot, gain more weight. Lose weight, gain more weight, overshoot. That's the yo-yo effect, and it's a real problem with dieting. So let's think about this. Somebody goes on a crash diet, lose weight quickly, lose all this weight. So you lose weight, and you do. If you go on these crash fad diets and you're very strict about it, you can lose weight rather quickly. And you think, oh, this works. This is the best diet in the world. But there are pressures, metabolic pressures, fat pressures, to bring you up to this theoretical set point of fat. The body thinks it's starving. It doesn't think it's dieting to look better. It thinks it's starving. So when you go back to a normal diet, and people who go on fad diets don't stay on them forever, you go back to a normal diet, even a normal diet with low calorie, there are these pressures for the sugars to be converted into fats because it's trying to get you back up to that set point. And if there's no sugars in the blood, you're very hungry, glucostatic hypothesis. And you actually overshoot. You overshoot, and now you've gained more weight than you used to be, and the set point then reestablishes itself because the brain says, oh, you were starving, so obviously you need to be a little bit more heavy, so in the future when you starve and you lose a lot of weight like this, you won't die. And the rule is the best way to gain weight is to lose weight quickly. That seems a little counterintuitive, but it's true. So let's think about this. Let's think about this from a biology point of view and from a psychology point of view. And this is Dr. Shapiro's guide to weight loss. Okay? I'm not trying to sell you a book. I'm not trying to sell you food in the mail. I'm just trying to give an indication of really how weight is lost and kept off successfully. Here we go. A few rules. One is to lose weight slowly. Allow that set point to adjust. Lose a pound a week, right? Hey, a pound a week, in half a year, you're down 25 pounds or so. That's a lot. You just have to be patient. And if your body loses a pound a week, it's not saying to itself, oh, I'm starving, overshoot, get those pressures. So any weight loss plan that says, lose weight quickly, shed 10 pounds in the first 5 days, lose 20 pounds, it's the worst thing you could do for losing weight. Now, the product will make you lose that weight, and you'll think the product is great. But then the world and your brain goes against you, and you go back up, and you go back to where you were, and you overshoot, and you gain 5 pounds from where you started. Now, you look at that diet, and you think to yourself, well, the diet was great. It was my fault. No. It's the fact you lost weight quickly. Another rule. Do not participate in any fad diet that causes you to eat food you don't plan on eating for the rest of your life. Okay? So these diets where they say, okay, eat cabbage soup. Eat cabbage soup for 3 weeks, for a month. And you're like, okay, I'm eating my cabbage soup. And you lose weight, and you lose weight. Oh, this is wonderful. But who is going to eat cabbage soup the rest of their life? Or who's going to change their diet to this new fad diet of not eating any carbohydrates like the Atkinson's diet or whatever? It doesn't work. You have to change things moderately, slowly, and change things in ways that this is just the part of your life. And that goes to this point here. Maybe you could cut down, or maybe somebody who you're trying to help can cut down on high fructose drinks because the body is not made to eat this much sugar. And so it's converting it into fats. The average American is eating over 20 teaspoons of sugar a day. We should be eating no more than 9. A natural diet of the human being before processed sugar was closer to 3. But we're eating 20 or 25 or 30 or 40. What if you could bring that down to 15 or 14? Okay, so high fructose drinks, high sugar drinks, even juices can be high in sugar because you're going to convert those very quickly. Diet drinks might not be the answer, though. There is some evidence that people who drink diet drinks, this was done in a lab with rats, if you give a rat diet soda, it is tricking the brain. The brain is saying, I'm getting lots of sugar because I can taste it. But it's not getting sugar. So there is these great motivations to get that sugar. And so in the rat study, one rat was given diet Coke or whatever, and the other rat was given a non-diet drink. And then they were given access to sugar. And the one who got the diet actually ate more sugar the rest of the day. It caught up. It made up the difference. And so people might say, well, I only drink Diet Coke. Yeah, but it's tricking the brain and it's motivating you to eat sugars in other ways. So it might not be the best solution. Just eat less processed sugar. And that's not easy. That is not an easy thing. I'm not saying Dr. Shapiro's Guide to Weight Loss is an easy thing. I'm saying that these are things that are difficult. So more sugars from natural sugars like fruits, more complex carbohydrates like pastas, and less sugary stuff. Now this is what's difficult, especially if you start with Halloween and end up with Valentine's Day. Every 3 weeks there's a holiday where somebody's shoving big sugary cakes in your face and they're delicious and you want to eat them. But again, this is a guide to weight loss. It is monitoring your simple sugar intake. Look at this. This is the sugar consumed in a year, right? Going back to the 1800s, looking at the diets people used and looking at it now. I'm sorry, but this is a tremendous change. And so what's interesting now is you say, okay, I've cut down on my sugars. I've gone from 25 to 18 teaspoons of sugar a day. That's a great thing. But you should be eating 9. You should be eating less. That's a change in the way you eat. There's candy everywhere. I don't know what it is. There's candy everywhere, and you just start sticking this stuff in your mouth. Don't buy food in bulk, especially potato chips and sweet things. Okay, you go to Costco's and you go, I like myself a Twinkie now and then, a cupcake. And those are expensive. Those are $1.80 at the store. And I get a little package. If I go to Costco's and I get a package of 50, let me take out my calculator, blah, blah, blah. It's only 52 cents a package. Think of the money I'll save. And yet what happens is you go through those much quickly because of their availability. You open up the cover, they're there. You shove them in your mouth. You have low self-control. And we're going to talk about the idea of how we discount the value of stuff when we have to wait in a later section. But you're much better off paying the $1.80 when you really want that Twinkie instead of buying things in bulk. Same with potato chips. Buy a big giant bag, you're going to eat that big giant bag. Buy it in small amounts. Now, in Dr. Shapiro's Guide to Weight Loss, I don't think it's right to say, I'm never going to eat chocolate again, I'm never going to eat a Twinkie again. It's reasonable, I think, and other people think, to have some of these kinds of sweets now and then. Not in the morning, noon, and night. Once on the weekend, once in a while as treats. This is that going against that idea of the cabbage diet. We don't eat anything but cabbage. The sweets, it's just if you have 10, bring it down to 5, in a week. Also, all you can eat buffet. We're going to learn in a later slide how bad that is. And while that's delicious, a variety of food makes you eat more of the food. Okay? There's literally an effect called the buffet effect. Avoid these things because you will walk out of there eating 3,000 calories. Because all you can eat, in your brain you go, well, I'm going to eat all I can. And then you feel bad. Okay? Guide to weight loss. Add calorie burning mechanisms to your day. I don't think it's a good thing to say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start running. I'm going to run 5 miles tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to start running 5 miles. That you get burnout, and that you actually can get an increase in stress, and that's not good. And we'll talk about that in a second. The idea is walk upstairs instead of taking the elevator. Walk up and downstairs a couple times. Walk around campus. Take a 10-minute walk and see if you can be consistent. It's about consistent exercise. It's not about super big exercise. And so show a slow but gradual increase because it's calories burned is as important as calories taken in. So if you can up the calories burned, so now you're burning an extra 300 calories a day by walking for half an hour, that's going to make a big difference. Not only that, when you exercise, you increase your resting metabolism. So you burn more calories when you're not exercising during the day if you have an exercise regimen. Now, exercise also is a great way to reduce stress. Now, cortisol is kind of a bad thing for people trying to diet. We've all experienced that. In the middle of finals week, don't you just want to have a giant cheeseburger? I mean, you're stressed out and you're just thinking comfort food and you just want to eat that food. And because cortisol does a couple things. Cortisol is it's a hormone released from the adrenal gland when you are having a chronic stress. The stress is occurring for a while. It's also a reaction to acute stress, quick stress, but cortisol flows when you're having a lot of stress. But cortisol also does another thing, and it goes to the area of the brain that deals with addiction, the mesotelencephalic dopamine system. Remember that the nucleus accumbens becomes hypersensitive with cortisol. So people under stress have that motivation to eat food when it's not necessary. And so people who go through quick weight loss also produce cortisol because their body is stressed by the quick weight loss, and that is even worse. So, exercise reduces stress. Exercise reduces calories. It's really the best way to add a little bit of activity. So let's talk about some theories about why we start meals, why we continue to eat, and what stops meals. Well, we start meals because we've learned to start meals at certain times. Classical conditioning. It's amazing what the body will go through when because of classical conditioning. If it's 6 o'clock and you eat every day at 6 o'clock, at 5:45 you begin to bind up glucose into storage because the brain says more food's coming. I'm going to get prepared for it. And so that will add to your hunger that time of day because you're really taking that glucose out. We eat when it's time to eat. We get on these schedules. If you travel, let's say you travel over to Europe or something, your brain still has a timer, and it still will get hungry at the time you ate back in California, and that needs to get adjusted. So here's just a very simple experiment. Got a rat. Show one stimulus, give them cheese. Show another stimulus, and they don't get cheese. Light cheese, metronome, no cheese. And then you look at how fast they eat when a stimulus is presented. So the CS plus, you present the light that was associated with cheese, and the time it takes them to go get food, very short. The CS minus, that was associated with no food, and the time is much less. It's a classical conditioning response to go get food. Here's kind of an interesting experiment. One thing will cause us to eat when we're around people. Food is a very social thing. It's been a social thing for a very long time because we're social animals. So we get social cues. But we also get stomach cues. And one of the famous experiments, this was done a long time ago by Cannon and Washburn, they literally put a tube down into people's stomachs. And the balloon that they put down there, they would expand and they would shrink. And people would press a lever when they felt hungry. So when the balloon shrank, they weren't hungry. They were hungry, and when it expanded, the stomach expands. The nerves around the stomach expand and signal that they're not hungry. So literally the rumbling of the stomach causes us to eat. A rumbling stomach. So if we just expand the stomach, even there's no food, even there's no glucose, even though there's no anything, it still can reduce our tendency to eat. So, what continues a meal? Again, the presence of other people. We're social animals. I noticed this. As soon as I started dating my wife and we got married, boy, I started eating a lot more. It's a very social thing. For example, De Castro found that the size of the meal was directly correlated with the number of people who were present. Now, I don't think of this as a good way to lose weight. In other words, avoid all people because you'll eat less. That's a bit extreme. So, sensory-specific satiety refers to the decrease in the pleasantness of the food and consumption of food after we've eaten it to satiety. In other words, eat a lot of the same food and we eat less of it. However, if you break it up and eat a variety of food, we can eat more of a variety of food. We have a motivation to do that. So if you eat the same type of food, you'll eat less. But if you eat a lot of different types of food, you can eat more and more. And there we go back to the buffet. Boy, you go to one of those buffets and there is food everywhere. You're eating a little taste of all these varieties of food, and you will eat more and more of it. The buffet effect. Look at all those food. I would eat some of that, and then I'd be full. But look at that, and then the shrimp bar. Going to go to the shrimp bar. Food. So here's a experiment, very simple experiment by Rolls, and Rowe. They had one flavor of food, and they asked, how much did you eat of that food? Or 3 flavors of food. Simple, kind of controlled experiment. After 7 minutes, after 14 minutes, after 21 minutes. Simply having 3 different flavors of food, we eat more of it. And of course, the tastiness of the food. And we know this. Things that really hit that part of the brain that looks for fats and meats and salts and sugars, and these are very tasty. We have receptors on our tongue that are very sensitive to those flavors, and it goes up to that old part of the brain and really kicks off that reward system and the motivation system. We actually call this kind of thing a cephalic effect or response. Cephalic is your head. So when you smell delicious food, when you taste a little taste, suddenly the salivation, the gastric juices, the release of insulin. If you smell some delicious food, you're going to release insulin from your pancreas. Your insulin is going to bind up the sugar. It's going to bind it up into glycogen. And now you don't have enough glucose in your blood, and now you get really hungry, okay? So, a lot of people say that food comes in through the eyes, it comes through the nose, you see those things, and those will cause a reaction that will make you hungry. Increased autonomic response increases food consumption. The autonomic response is the salivation, is the gastric juices, is the insulin, all because you're just looking and smelling food. Huh? You're gonna look at this and you're gonna stop this lecture right now, and you're gonna go in and you're gonna get yourself some chocolate. Look at that. Doesn't that look spicy? I saw that on the internet. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe chicken, maybe shrimp. That looks spicy and yummy. Okay, I'm going to have to stop, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to go eat some food. I'm going to come back and finish my lecture later. We also have innate preferences for food. We're born, we want sweet, we don't like bitter. We can learn to like bitter. People learn to like coffee, and people learn to like beers that are bitter. But we start off avoiding bitter and liking sweet. Rats and humans show an innate preference for sweet and salty food. Again, that goes back to that old brain that's looking for salt for survival. No salt, the brain doesn't work. This is back when salt was not very abundant. Sweets, okay? We got to get sugars to the brain. Reduced salt intake can affect taste and lead to salt craving. So you can crave these foods if you just go without them for a while, because there's that strong motivation that comes genetically. What did she just eat? Ooh, I like this. And wait a minute. Okay. We also can learn food preferences. Most animals start off neophobic, afraid of new things, afraid of new food. But we get a familiarity with the food. So the mere exposure effect is we like the food that we had when we were kids oftentimes. And so if you grew up in a family with certain types of food that came a lot, you like that food and you want to eat that food now as adults. And you can do this even on a daily basis. You can do this, but it's just that our tendency, even as adults, we start off a little neophobic with food. So here's an experiment. Subjects drank 4 tropical fruit juices, 0 to 20 times. Then subjects were asked to rate the likability of the juice. The more you drank, the more you liked it. And I'm not saying right then and there. I'm saying you drank it 20 times, you come back the next day, and you say, do you like this juice or do you like another juice? And, oh, I like the one I had 20 times. If you drank it only 10, you like it less. If you only drink it a couple times, you like it even less. Just a mere exposure. And this is an evolutionarily important thing, too. I mean, for a long time, we had to eat things, and if we didn't get sick, we could survive on that thing we ate. Because oftentimes we'd eat something, it would make us sick. And that leads to taste aversion, another innate quality. This is classical conditioning. A stimulus associated, like a novel food, associated with being sick, can produce an aversion. And that aversion can last a very long time. You can be very sensitive to that. So give a dog cheesy bacon snacks and lithium chloride, which makes them sick, makes them throw up and sick, and they'll avoid that food in the future. This is, again, very important because evolutionarily speaking, things weren't packaged. You didn't know that you weren't going to die from it. So you ate a little bit of it, and if it made you sick, you avoided the smell of that food. You avoided those foods in the future. And you might not even know it. This is what's interesting. You might have some food, and then you get sick that night, and you don't even know you have an aversion to that food. Let's say you eat some some strange kind of a garlicky food or something, and you're sick that night, you're still smelling that garlic when you're sick. Excuse me, it's kind of gross, but you're still even tasting it a little bit when you're sick. Again, kind of gross. Now, 3 months later, somebody goes, here's that garlicky food I gave you, 3 months ago. Oh, I love that. That was a great meal. And you start to eat it, and you feel nauseous as soon as it gets up to your nose, as soon as you smell it. These are very deep in your brain, not conscious, subconscious kind of associations. And you eat less food. You eat less of it. Very important. Eat some cheese, some strange cheese that's associated with some bacteria that makes you sick, and the conditioned response is to feel sick and to avoid that food. Well, a lot of books talk about this boundary model, and I'm just going to give you the overview of it. But it had a lot of influence on how we eat. They talked about a lower boundary and an upper boundary. The lower boundary and upper boundary deals with physiological homeostasis. You're hungry, you haven't eaten for a while, you get pains, you feel bad, right? You feel bad, you haven't eaten all day, you feel kind of bad. It's an aversiveness, and you are motivated to bring yourself out of that aversive state, and so you're motivated to bring yourself back to homeostasis. It's a physiological motivation, right? Upper boundary is you've eaten too much. You just had Thanksgiving dinner and you stuffed a bunch of food down your gullet and you feel, again, aversive. You feel pain in stomach and you've got to unbutton the top button of your pants, and that's another physiological reaction, and you lack the motivation to eat because you are trying to get back to homeostasis and avoid this aversive nature. However, according to these models, there's this intermediate step, the zone of biological indifference. I kind of like that, the zone of biological indifference. Between those boundaries, we still are motivated to eat, but those motivations don't come from avoiding aversiveness. Those come from tasty food and social environments and buffet effect and all those other kinds of things. So what stops a meal? Well, we already know that if just the expansion of the stomach there affects nerve signals from the stomach, goes to the brain, tells the brain, stop eating. We also have the ventromedial hypothalamus. This is also detecting glucose. And when there's a lot of glucose, it's going to do a few things. It's going to help to send a signal down to the pancreas to release insulin to bind up that extra glucose. It's going to do those things. But it's also going to send signals to the brain saying, okay, you need to stop. This is a good time to stop eating. So here's a rat, it's a big rat, that had its ventromedial hypothalamus lesioned. It didn't know when to stop eating. Okay, so if you lesion that, you have an overeating, especially of the carbohydrates. It may affect the release of insulin and all those kinds of things. You also have a hormone called cholecystokinin, or CCK. So let's talk about this hormone. The hormone is released from the small intestine, the duodenum, the first section of the small intestine here, releases CCK and goes back to the stomach and helps to regulate the dumping of the food in the stomach out here. We have the sphincter, the pyloric sphincter. This is the esophageal sphincter, sometimes called the cardiac sphincter, because it's right behind your heart, cardiac. But it blocks food from coming out of your stomach up into your esophagus, and this blocks from coming out. CCK is released to help mediate that. If there's a lot of CCK, there's lots of food being released. CCK causes the gallbladder to release bile into the intestine to break down fats. It's a big part of digestion. However, it, through a second messenger system, goes to the brain and says, listen, I'm working hard down here. There's lots of food down here. Stop eating, right? Inject a rat with CCK and they stop eating. Okay, this is that messenger system of the fact that there's a lot of food being digested. So, that's a hormone, CCK. There's a number of digestive hormones that have a lot to do with how much food you're going to take in. Ghrelin is released from the stomach, but ghrelin is released just before eating, and it helps to motivate food. It goes up here to the nucleus accumbens in the ventral tegmental area, Do you remember what those do? Remember that had to do with addiction? Well, it's a motivation center. That's all it is. Just because it's really hyperreactive in addiction, it's the motivation center and saying, there's ghrelin, you should be motivated to eat. You should think about eating, you should plan on eating. It goes to the hypothalamus. It has a lot to do with motivating you to eat. Ghrelin is high before lunch, before dinner, motivates you to eat. And then this one's kind of obvious, kind of weird though. You stop eating because you know you've eaten a lot. You have a memory of the fact that you've eaten a lot. This is a cognitive process. However, if you have somebody who has damage to the hippocampus and they don't have good memory, they can't convert short-term to long-term memory, they don't know that they've just eaten, and so they'll keep eating. So they'll have several lunches. So just the memory alone is an influential factor. Most people with hippocampal damage took a second and third lunch. Even though their stomach was expanding, even though there's glucose floating around in the blood, there's a cognitive component there as well, a memory component. So let's look at some eating disorders. A number of people, between 8 and 9 million people in the United States, suffer from eating disorders. 1 to 3 of all young women suffer from anorexia, 1 to 3%. Anorexia is an extremely dangerous disorder. It's one of the most fatal psychological disorders that we have. And we also have bulimia. There's lots of complex problems going on here. They might binge a lot of food and throw up, or they might not eat hardly any food at all. This isn't just a woman thing. It's also in men. It's psychological components to it. We also noticed that, like, for example, these didn't have high percentages in places like China. And then in the 1980s, the TV show Baywatch started going worldwide, and people were watching all these skinny models running around, and suddenly we started seeing higher and higher instances of eating disorders like this. So keep in mind that these can be very, very dangerous. They're very difficult to treat, especially when they get to a certain level. High mortality in anorexia. Very sad. So one of the big problems in the United States, of course, and around the world, is obesity. 68% of adults in the U.S. are overweight. These are very high numbers. Children, the amount of children that are obese have increased. This increases in certain ethnic groups. We also know that 98% of dieters, especially if they lose weight quickly, regain the weight they've lost, but also tend to gain on extra weight. It's that yo-yo effect. The best way to gain weight is to lose weight quickly. Let's look at a map from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Here we are in 1985, and this is the level of obesity in the United States. And these numbers are 10% and 15%. Now we're in the 90s. It's going up, especially in the South, but still we're in around 14%, 15%. Oh, now we're getting to the 20%. It's the year 2000. Now we're up to 25 to 30%, especially in the South. And now we have places that are over 30% as of 2010. This is a really big change. And as the U.S. goes, so goes the world. We have these issues going around the world. We're leading the way on this. But this has a lot to do with healthcare, has a lot to do with psychology and motivation, and this is a big change in our country. So here's some statistics. I found these from 2009 to 2010, so it goes back a little bit. But these are percent obese by age group. This is the body mass index above 30. 16, this is as of 2010, so it's probably 16.9% of children are obese, 12% of preschoolers. These are really big numbers. 6 to 11-year-olds obesity percentage. Look at that growth. Okay, we're having children who are getting type 2 diabetes. This was a disease that affects the pancreas and the insulin levels, and it usually only hit people really much later in life. There is the slightest bit of hope I found some more recent statistics that there was actually a slight drop. For the first time in 30 years, the CDC is recording a slight drop in obesity rates at total and for men. The women are still, they kind of evened out. So maybe we're doing something about it. So this leads to these ideas of a disease that correlates with obesity. There's type 1 diabetes. This is an autoimmune disorder that destroys the pancreas. This is a genetic disorder, 10 to 15%. And these are, and this was people taking insulin since they were kids. But this new, which is known as adult onset diabetes, which is starting to show adolescent onset, is when people become insulin resistant because they just take in too much sugar. They're just eating too much sugar and they're gaining weight. And that can go away if people can lose weight and keep it off. And this can be caused by the diet people eat, the sugar they eat, and it's also linked to other things. People with diabetes have to take insulin. They also tend to have problems with vision because the retina is very sensitive to sugar levels. They have a lot of other problems. There are genetic components, but it has more to do with that map from the CDC than anything else. Remember the map where we had high levels, high density of obesity? Well, we have the high density of diabetes in the same area. So this is that body mass index. And, it's just kind of a rule of thumb, and I see different people talking about it in different ways. But you take your weight and you take your height and you go over and you find what would be a healthy weight range for your BMI and overweight and obese. And there's just about any website, just type in calculate BMI and you can plug these things in and you can see where you stand. I wanted to just point out that obesity rates are also around the world, and they are growing. The United States is leading the way, but this is also a global issue as well. We also have this really big boom of gastric bypass surgery, and this causes rapid weight loss, and it can cause, there's a lot of side effects and all these things. But if somebody has type 2 diabetes or sleep apnea or hypertension, high blood pressure, it actually might be the one way to survive being obese. And what they're doing is they're making a smaller stomach, and then they're taking a tube and connecting it to bypass a good portion of the small intestine. This is where a lot of food is absorbed. Bypass that. You can't eat as much and you can't absorb as much. And actually in Fresno County we have the highest rate of these types of surgeries pretty much in the world. People come from all over the world to get the surgery here because we have such good doctors that do this. But Fresno is number one. So here's some things that come with obesity: high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, gallbladder disease, lung breathing problems, all these kinds of things. And I really believe this. If you're going into psychology and to working with people, and that's your plan, you can, if you're good at your job and you know good techniques, behavioral cognitive therapies and techniques, you can do more for the health of somebody than a surgeon can. You can be better for the health of your patient than a doctor in many cases, and maybe it is a way of modifying behavior to a point where you don't have these issues. There's also sleep disturbances, sleep apnea that come with obesity. Being excluded from things. It depends on how people deal with this. You can get discrimination, discrimination at work, discrimination from being hired, prejudices in school and workplace. So these are problems that psychologists can help with. It should be noted as an ending note here that in terms of serious psychological problems, obese people don't seem to have any more serious psychological problems than other people who are normal weight. the problems come externally from prejudice and the consequences of some of those things. And in fact, there's some studies that show that people who are overweight sometimes can be less anxious, less depressed than somebody who is constantly worried about maintaining this perfect weight.